The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Kensington Palace as Thomas Whitmore adjusted his ceremonial uniform for what he believed would be another routine day of royal protection duty. At 28 years old, Thomas had served in the Royal Protection Unit for 6 years, but nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for the events that would unfold on this particular Tuesday in November. Thomas had always taken pride in his position. Born to a working-class family in Manchester, he had worked tirelessly to earn his place among the elite guards who protected the royal family. His father, a coal miner, had initially been skeptical of his son's ambitions, but Thomas's determination and unwavering dedication had eventually won him over. The day Thomas received his appointment to the Royal Protection Unit, his father had tears in his eyes, finally understanding that his son had achieved something extraordinary. The protocol for protecting Princess Charlotte was well established and meticulously planned. At 8 years old, she was third in line to the throne, and her safety was paramount. Thomas had been assigned to her detail for 18 months, and in that time he had developed a deep respect for the young princess's intelligence and composure. Unlike many children her age, Charlotte seemed to understand the weight of her position, carrying herself with a dignity that often surprised visiting dignitaries and family friends alike. On this particular morning, the palace was buzzing with preparation for an important visit. Lady Victoria Pemberton, a distant cousin of the royal family and a woman known for her strong opinions and entitled behavior, was coming for lunch with Princess Charlotte and her governess. Lady Victoria had been away from England for several years, living in various European capitals, and her return had been the subject of much speculation in royal circles. Thomas remembered the briefing he had received about Lady Victoria. She was described as someone who had grown accustomed to a certain level of deference during her time abroad, particularly in smaller royal courts where her distant connection to the British crown had earned her special treatment. The warning signs were there in the detailed notes. Expects royal protocol to be observed in her favor, has been known to make inappropriate demands of staff, and most telling, believes her bloodline entitles her to special consideration. As Thomas took his position in the corridor outside the blue drawing room, where lunch was to be served, he reflected on the countless hours of training that had brought him to this moment. Royal protection wasn't just about physical security. It involved understanding the complex dynamics of royal life, the subtle hierarchies, and the unwritten rules that governed interactions within palace walls. He had learned to read situations quickly, to anticipate potential problems before they escalated, and to maintain absolute discretion while remaining alert to every nuance of behavior around him. The palace staff had been preparing for Lady Victoria's visit since dawn. The head butler, Mr. Richardson, had personally overseen the preparation of the blue drawing room, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards expected for royal entertaining. The porcelain had been selected from the finest collection, the silverware polished to perfection, and fresh flowers arranged in crystal vases that had been in the royal collection for over 2 centuries. Thomas observed the careful choreography of palace life as staff members moved through their duties with practiced precision. Each person knew their role exactly, from the footmen who would serve the meal to the ladies-in-waiting who would attend to Princess Charlotte's needs. This was a world where tradition and protocol governed every interaction, where centuries of royal etiquette created an invisible framework that guided behavior and expectations. Princess Charlotte arrived in the blue drawing room precisely at noon, accompanied by her governess, Miss Andrews, a woman in her 50s who had devoted her career to the education and guidance of royal children. Charlotte wore a navy blue dress with white collar and cuffs, her hair neatly arranged with a simple blue ribbon. Despite her young age, she moved with the composed grace that had been instilled in her since she could walk, understanding that even a casual lunch carried the weight of royal representation. Thomas positioned himself strategically where he could observe the entire room while remaining unobtrusive. His training had taught him to be virtually invisible while missing nothing, to protect while never interfering with the natural flow of royal life. He watched as Charlotte greeted the staff with polite acknowledgments, her manner reflecting the careful balance between royal authority and gracious consideration that marked the best of royal behavior. Lady Victoria arrived 15 minutes late, a breach of protocol that immediately set a tone of disregard for established customs. She swept into the blue drawing room as if she owned it, her elaborate hat adorned with peacock feathers, her dress clearly designed to command attention rather than show appropriate respect for the occasion. Thomas noticed immediately that she failed to offer the customary curtsy to Princess Charlotte, instead extending her hand as if expecting the young princess to kiss it. The awkwardness of the moment was palpable. Miss Andrews stepped forward slightly, her diplomatic training kicking in as she attempted to smooth over the breach of protocol with gentle redirections. Princess Charlotte, however, handled the situation with remarkable composure for someone her age, simply nodding acknowledgement while maintaining her own dignity. Thomas found himself impressed once again by the young princess's instinctive understanding of royal protocol and her ability to navigate difficult social situations. As lunch was served, Thomas observed the conversation from his position near the window. Lady Victoria dominated the discussion, regaling Princess Charlotte and Miss Andrews with elaborate stories of her travels and the various European nobles she claimed to know intimately. Her tone grew increasingly condescending as she spoke, treating Princess Charlotte more like an amusing child than a member of the royal family deserving of proper respect. The first real sign of trouble came when Lady Victoria began making demands of the serving staff that went far beyond normal expectations. She insisted that her water glass be refilled every few minutes, complained about the temperature of the soup, and sent back the main course because it wasn't prepared to her exact specifications. Each demand was delivered with an imperious tone that suggested she viewed the palace staff as her personal servants rather than professionals serving the royal family. Thomas watched Princess Charlotte's reaction carefully. The young princess said nothing, but her posture grew slightly more rigid, and he could see the careful attention she was paying to Lady Victoria's behavior. At 8 years old, Charlotte was already developing the keen observational skills that would serve her well in royal life, learning to read people and situations with the accuracy that would be essential to her future role. The situation escalated when Lady Victoria began criticizing the palace's daily routines, suggesting that Princess Charlotte's schedule was too restrictive and that she needed more sophisticated influences in her life. She implied that the current arrangements were somehow inadequate for someone of Charlotte's bloodline, conveniently ignoring the fact that these arrangements had been carefully designed by some of the most experienced royal advisors in the kingdom. Miss Andrews attempted to redirect the conversation several times, but Lady Victoria seemed determined to establish her own authority in the situation. She began making suggestions about Princess Charlotte's education, her social activities, and even her future role, speaking as if she had some inherent right to influence these decisions. Thomas could see that her behavior was not just inappropriate but potentially disruptive to the carefully maintained environment that protected and nurtured the young princess. The turning point came when Lady Victoria suggested that she should be given a permanent apartment in Kensington Palace, so that she could provide Princess Charlotte with what she termed proper guidance from someone who truly understands royal life. The audacity of the request was breathtaking, particularly coming from someone whose connection to the royal family was distant at best, and whose behavior throughout lunch had demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of royal protocol and respect. Princess Charlotte listened to this suggestion in silence, but Thomas could see something changing in her demeanor. The polite attention she had maintained throughout lunch was being replaced by something more focused and determined. Even at 8 years old, she seemed to understand that a line was being crossed, that Lady Victoria's behavior had moved from merely inappropriate to actually presumptuous. As the lunch continued, Lady Victoria's sense of entitlement only grew more pronounced. She began speaking about Princess Charlotte's future as if she had some inherent right to influence it, making references to our family in a way that suggested a much closer relationship than actually existed. Thomas realized he was witnessing something significant, a test of Princess Charlotte's developing understanding of her own position and authority. The conversation took on an increasingly tense undercurrent as Lady Victoria continued to overstep boundaries. She criticized the palace's security arrangements within Thomas's hearing, suggested changes to Charlotte's daily routine without any understanding of the complex considerations involved, and generally behaved as if she were entitled to remake royal life according to her own preferences. Thomas found himself in a unique position as an observer of this unfolding drama. His role required him to remain professionally detached while staying alert to any potential threats to Princess Charlotte's well-being. But as he watched Lady Victoria's increasingly inappropriate behavior, he began to understand that the threat here wasn't physical, but something more subtle and potentially more dangerous, an attempt to undermine the young princess's understanding of her own authority and position. The atmosphere in the blue drawing room grew increasingly uncomfortable as Lady Victoria's behavior became more outrageous. She began making demands about the palace's daily operations, suggesting that certain staff members should be reassigned to serve her during her visits, and generally acting as if Kensington Palace existed for her convenience, rather than as the carefully managed home of the future monarch. Miss Andrews's diplomatic skills were being tested to their limits as she attempted to maintain the courtesy due to any guest while protecting Princess Charlotte from behavior that was clearly inappropriate. Thomas could see the governess's growing concern as Lady Victoria's sense of entitlement reached new heights, threatening to create a situation that could be damaging to the young princess's development and understanding of royal protocol. As dessert was served, Thomas sensed that the situation was approaching a critical moment. Princess Charlotte had remained largely silent throughout Lady Victoria's increasingly outrageous performance, but her attention had never wavered. She was watching, listening, and learning, preparing to respond to a challenge that went to the very heart of what it meant to be royal. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test everything Princess Charlotte had learned about her position, her responsibilities, and her inherent authority. Thomas realized he was about to witness something that would be talked about in royal circles for years to come, the moment when a young princess would be forced to assert her rightful place in the complex hierarchy of royal life. Lady Victoria's behavior had crossed every line of appropriate conduct, and now Princess Charlotte would have to decide how to respond. Thomas found himself holding his breath, understanding that he was about to witness a defining moment in the young princess's development, a moment that would reveal whether she truly understood the weight and authority of her royal blood. The delicate clink of fine china against silver spoons filled the blue drawing room as the palace staff served the final course. Thomas maintained his watchful position, his trained eye taking in every detail of the scene unfolding before him. The tension that had been building throughout lunch had reached a point where even the most diplomatic observer could sense that something significant was about to happen. Lady Victoria had spent the better part of 2 hours demonstrating a level of entitlement that bordered on the absurd. Her latest demand involved insisting that the palace's head gardener be summoned immediately to discuss rearranging the flower beds outside her planned apartment to better suit her aesthetic preferences. The presumption was staggering, particularly since no such apartment had been offered or even discussed by anyone with actual authority to make such decisions. Princess Charlotte sat quietly, her small hands folded properly in her lap, her posture perfect despite the lengthy meal. Thomas had worked with enough royal children to recognize the signs of careful self-control. The young princess was not simply enduring Lady Victoria's behavior. She was studying it, learning from it, and preparing her response. At 8 years old, she displayed a level of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking that impressed even the experienced protection officer. The conversation had turned to Princess Charlotte's upcoming public appearances, with Lady Victoria offering unsolicited advice about how the young princess should conduct herself. She spoke with the casual authority of someone who believed her distant bloodline connection gave her the right to guide royal policy and behavior. Her suggestions were not only inappropriate, but revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of the careful planning and centuries of tradition that governed royal public engagements. Miss Andrews continued her valiant efforts to maintain diplomatic courtesy while protecting her charge. The governess had been chosen for her position, not only for her educational qualifications, but for her deep understanding of royal protocol and her ability to navigate complex social situations. Thomas could see the strain on her face as she attempted to balance respect for any guest against her primary duty to protect Princess Charlotte's interests and dignity. The palace staff moved through their duties with professional efficiency, but Thomas noticed the subtle signs of their discomfort with Lady Victoria's behavior. The head butler's jaw was slightly tighter than usual, and the footmen exchanged brief glances that spoke volumes about their shared opinion of the guest's conduct. These were individuals who had devoted their careers to serving the royal family with distinction, and they recognized inappropriate behavior when they saw it. Lady Victoria seemed completely oblivious to the mounting tension around her. She continued her monologue about royal life as if she were an authority on the subject, making sweeping statements about what Princess Charlotte should and shouldn't do, whom she should associate with, and how her education should be modified to better reflect modern royal realities. Each pronouncement demonstrated not only her presumption, but her lack of understanding about the careful consideration that went into every aspect of the young princess's development. The critical moment began with what seemed like a simple request. Lady Victoria turned to one of the footmen and imperiously demanded that he immediately prepare tea service in what she termed my usual style, describing an elaborate presentation that would require the use of some of the palace's most precious ceremonial pieces. The request was inappropriate not only because of its presumptuous tone, but because it assumed a level of familiarity and authority that Lady Victoria simply didn't possess. Thomas watched as Princess Charlotte's attention sharpened. The young princess had been listening carefully throughout lunch, but now her focus became laser-like. She understood, perhaps instinctively, that this moment required her attention and possibly her intervention. The footman looked uncertain, clearly recognizing that the request was inappropriate, but unsure how to refuse without creating diplomatic difficulties. Miss Andrews began to speak, undoubtedly intending to redirect the situation diplomatically, but Princess Charlotte raised her hand slightly, a gesture so subtle that only those trained to watch for royal signals would have noticed it. The governess immediately fell silent, recognizing that her charge wished to handle this situation herself. Thomas felt his pulse quicken as he realized he was about to witness something extraordinary. Lady Victoria, completely missing the significance of the moment, continued her demands with increasing stridency. She began listing specific pieces of china and silver that she wanted used for her tea service, pieces that Thomas knew were reserved for the most formal state occasions. Her knowledge of these items suggested she had done research, perhaps even planning this moment, intending to establish her supposed status through the ceremonial objects she demanded. The young princess stood up slowly, her movement graceful and deliberate. Despite her small stature, something in her bearing commanded immediate attention from everyone in the room. The practiced poise that had been instilled in her since birth was now being channeled into something more powerful, the inherent authority that came with her bloodline and position. Lady Victoria finally noticed that Princess Charlotte was standing and looked up expectantly, perhaps assuming the young princess was about to excuse herself or defer to her guest's wishes. Instead, Princess Charlotte remained silent for a moment, her gaze steady and thoughtful. Thomas realized he was witnessing the transformation of a well-mannered child into something more formidable, a future monarch asserting her rightful authority. The silence stretched for several seconds, and in that quiet space, the atmosphere of the room completely changed. The staff members stopped their movements, sensing that something significant was happening. Miss Andrews watched with careful attention, ready to support her charge, but recognizing that this was Princess Charlotte's moment to handle. Even Lady Victoria seemed to sense that the dynamic had shifted, though she didn't yet understand how or why. When Princess Charlotte finally spoke, her voice was clear and calm, carrying a weight that seemed impossible from someone so young. She didn't raise her voice or show any sign of anger or distress. Instead, she spoke with the quiet certainty of someone who understood exactly who she was and what that meant. The words she chose were precise and devastating in their simplicity. She addressed Lady Victoria directly, acknowledging her presence while simultaneously establishing the proper hierarchy between them. Princess Charlotte's tone was polite, but firm, respectful, but absolutely clear about the boundaries that existed and could not be crossed. Thomas found himself holding his breath as he listened to the young princess speak. Every word was carefully chosen, every pause deliberate. She was not simply responding to Lady Victoria's inappropriate behavior. She was establishing principles that would govern future interactions. The 8-year-old was demonstrating wisdom and authority that would have been impressive in someone 3 times her age. Lady Victoria's reaction was immediate and telling, her face flushed with surprise and what appeared to be indignation. She had clearly expected the young princess to defer to her supposed authority, to accept her guidance and demands without question. The reality that Princess Charlotte possessed her own authority and was prepared to use it came as an obvious shock. The confrontation that followed revealed the fundamental difference between earned authority and assumed entitlement. Lady Victoria attempted to reassert her position through increasingly strident demands and references to her bloodline connection. She spoke of her rights as a member of the extended royal family, her experience in European courts, and her supposed expertise in royal matters. Princess Charlotte listened to these protestations with the same careful attention she had shown throughout lunch, but her position remained unchanged. She had assessed the situation, made her decision, and was prepared to defend it. Her responses were measured and thoughtful, addressing each of Lady Victoria's arguments with logic and quiet dignity. The contrast between the two figures was striking. Lady Victoria, despite her adult status and elaborate clothing, appeared increasingly petulant and childish in her demands. Princess Charlotte, though physically small and only 8 years old, projected an authority that seemed to fill the room. The difference between genuine royal bearing and mere pretension was becoming obvious to everyone present. Thomas realized he was witnessing a masterclass in royal authority. Princess Charlotte was not simply refusing Lady Victoria's demands. She was demonstrating how real power operates through quiet confidence rather than loud insistence. The young princess understood that true authority doesn't need to shout or demand recognition. It exists simply because it is legitimate and earned. The palace staff watched the exchange with fascination and growing respect for their young charge. They had always been professional in their service to Princess Charlotte, but now they were seeing evidence of the leadership qualities that would serve her well in her future role. The 8-year-old was handling a difficult social situation with grace and firmness that commanded genuine admiration. Miss Andrews observed the interaction with obvious pride, recognizing that years of careful education and guidance were bearing fruit in this crucial moment. The governess had worked tirelessly to help Princess Charlotte understand not just the privileges of her position, but the responsibilities that came with it. This confrontation was evidence that those lessons had been truly absorbed and internalized. As the conversation continued, it became clear that Lady Victoria had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of royal authority. She seemed to believe that bloodline connection, however distant, automatically conferred certain rights and privileges. Princess Charlotte's response demonstrated a much more sophisticated understanding. That royal authority came with responsibilities and had to be exercised with wisdom and restraint. The young princess's handling of the situation revealed training and instinct working together perfectly. She had been taught the protocols and traditions of royal life, but she was also demonstrating an intuitive understanding of leadership that couldn't be taught. The combination was producing a response that was both technically correct and emotionally intelligent. Lady Victoria's frustration grew more apparent as she realized that her assumptions about the interaction were completely wrong. She had clearly expected to dominate the conversation and establish her authority over the young princess. Instead, she was learning that Princess Charlotte possessed resources of dignity and determination that were more than adequate to handle any challenge to her position. The confrontation was approaching its climax, and Thomas sensed that Princess Charlotte was preparing to deliver the definitive statement that would end the discussion once and for all. The young princess had listened patiently to Lady Victoria's arguments, had responded with appropriate courtesy, but was now ready to establish the final boundary that would define their relationship going forward. The moment that would be remembered and recounted for generations was about to unfold. Thomas Whitmore stood perfectly still, his professional training keeping him motionless even as his mind raced with the significance of what he was witnessing. Princess Charlotte remained standing, her small figure somehow commanding the entire room's attention. The 8-year-old had reached the point where diplomatic courtesy would give way to royal authority. Lady Victoria, clearly frustrated by her inability to dominate the conversation, made one final catastrophic attempt to assert her supposed superiority. She rose from her chair with dramatic flair, her elaborate dress rustling as she positioned herself to look down at the young princess. Her voice carried the imperious tone of someone who believed absolutely in her right to command obedience. She began by invoking her bloodline connection to the royal family, speaking as if this distant relationship gave her authority over Princess Charlotte's daily life and future decisions. Her words were carefully chosen to emphasize her adult status, her experience in European courts, and what she clearly believed was her superior understanding of royal life. She spoke of her right to guide the young princess's development, to influence her education, and to have a permanent place in the royal household. The presumption was breathtaking in its scope and audacity. Lady Victoria was not simply requesting consideration or offering advice. She was demanding recognition of what she believed was her inherent authority over the third in line to the throne. Her tone suggested that she viewed Princess Charlotte as a child who needed guidance, rather than as a member of the royal family deserving of proper respect and deference. Thomas watched Princess Charlotte's face carefully, noting the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated her growing resolve. The young princess had listened patiently to hours of inappropriate behavior, had maintained courtesy in the face of mounting provocation, but now she had reached the limit of what she would tolerate. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The well-mannered child was becoming the future monarch. Miss Andrews observed the exchange with careful attention, recognizing that this was a defining moment in her charge's development. Years of education in protocol, history, and leadership were about to be tested in real-world circumstances. The governess remained ready to intervene if necessary, but her expression suggested growing confidence that Princess Charlotte was fully capable of handling the situation herself. The palace staff had grown increasingly uncomfortable with Lady Victoria's behavior throughout lunch, but now they sensed that something decisive was about to happen. Their professional training required them to maintain perfect neutrality in any conflicts between guests, but their loyalty to the royal family was absolute. They watched with barely concealed anticipation as their young charge prepared to respond to this unprecedented challenge to her authority. Lady Victoria's final demand involved what she termed proper recognition of her status within the royal household. She insisted that she should be given formal acknowledgement of her role as Princess Charlotte's advisor and mentor, complete with the appropriate accommodations and staff support that such a position would require. The audacity was staggering, particularly since no one with actual authority had even suggested that such a role existed or was needed. She concluded her speech with what she clearly believed was a masterstroke, a direct challenge to Princess Charlotte's authority based on age and experience. Lady Victoria suggested that the young princess was too young to understand the complexities of royal life and needed guidance from someone with her supposedly superior knowledge and connections. The implication was clear. Princess Charlotte should defer to Lady Victoria's wishes because of her youth and inexperience. The silence that followed this pronouncement was profound and loaded with tension. Every person in the room understood that a line had been crossed, that Lady Victoria's behavior had moved from inappropriate to actually insulting. Princess Charlotte stood quietly for a moment, her gaze steady and thoughtful, as if she were considering not just her response, but the principles that should guide it. When she finally spoke, Princess Charlotte's voice carried a clarity and authority that seemed to transform the very atmosphere of the room. Her words were simple, direct, and devastating in their quiet power. She addressed Lady Victoria with perfect courtesy but absolute firmness, acknowledging her status as a guest while simultaneously establishing the unbridgeable gap between their respective positions. The phrase that would echo through royal circles for years to come was delivered with the calm certainty of someone who understood exactly who she was and what that meant. Princess Charlotte looked directly at Lady Victoria and spoke words that perfectly encapsulated the fundamental difference between them. "You are a guest, I am the blood." The impact of those 7 words was immediate and profound. In a single sentence, the 8-year-old princess had distilled centuries of royal tradition and hierarchy into a statement that was both respectful and absolutely final. She had acknowledged Lady Victoria's presence while simultaneously establishing the proper relationship between them. Thomas felt the weight of the moment as those words hung in the air. Princess Charlotte had not raised her voice, had not shown anger or disrespect, but had nonetheless delivered one of the most definitive assertions of royal authority he had ever witnessed. The young princess had demonstrated that true power didn't need volume or aggression. It existed in the quiet confidence of legitimate authority. Lady Victoria's reaction was immediate and telling. Her face went through a series of expressions as the full meaning of Princess Charlotte's words sank in. First came surprise, then confusion, then growing indignation as she realized that her carefully planned campaign to establish dominance had been completely and definitively rejected by someone she had assumed she could manipulate. The phrase, "I am the blood," carried particular significance in royal circles. It referenced the fundamental principle that governed royal authority, the divine right that came through bloodline succession. Princess Charlotte was not simply asserting her rank, she was invoking the deepest traditions of monarchy, the belief that royal authority came from God through hereditary succession and could not be challenged or assumed by others. Miss Andrews watched this exchange with obvious pride and satisfaction. Years of careful education had prepared Princess Charlotte for exactly this type of situation, and the young princess was demonstrating that she had absorbed not just the protocols, but the deeper principles that governed royal life. The governess recognized that she was witnessing a crucial moment in her charge's development into the leader she would one day become. The palace staff responded to Princess Charlotte's statement with barely concealed approval. While they maintained their professional neutrality, their respect for the young princess was evident in their posture and expressions. They had witnessed her handle an extremely difficult situation with grace and authority, demonstrating the qualities that would serve her well in her future role as monarch. Lady Victoria attempted to recover from the devastating simplicity of Princess Charlotte's response by launching into another speech about her rights and qualifications, but the moment had passed, and her words rang hollow against the quiet authority the young princess had just demonstrated. Every argument she made only served to highlight the fundamental difference between earned authority and assumed entitlement. Princess Charlotte listened to Lady Victoria's continued protests with the same patient attention she had shown throughout lunch, but her position remained unchanged. She had made her statement and established her boundaries, and no amount of arguing would alter those facts. The 8-year-old had demonstrated wisdom far beyond her years in recognizing when discussion ends and authority must be asserted. The confrontation revealed the depth of Princess Charlotte's understanding of her role and responsibilities. She had not simply rejected Lady Victoria's demands. She had done so in a way that upheld the dignity of the crown while maintaining appropriate courtesy toward a guest. The balance was perfect and spoke to training and instinct working together seamlessly. Thomas realized he was witnessing something that would be studied and discussed in royal circles for generations. The phrase, "You are a guest, I am the blood," would become legendary not just for its directness, but for the perfect way it encapsulated the principles of royal authority. Princess Charlotte had created a moment that would define how future generations understood the proper relationship between the crown and those who sought to influence it. The young princess's handling of the situation demonstrated several crucial qualities that would serve her well in her future role. She had shown patience in allowing Lady Victoria to reveal the extent of her presumption, wisdom in choosing the perfect moment to respond, and courage in standing firm against pressure from an adult who had tried to intimidate her into submission. Lady Victoria's continued attempts to argue her position only served to highlight the contrast between her behavior and Princess Charlotte's dignified response. The more she protested, the more obvious it became that she fundamentally misunderstood the nature of royal authority and the respect that was due to the crown regardless of the age of its representative. The phrase, "I am the blood," would resonate far beyond this single confrontation. It represented the timeless principle that royal authority came through divine appointment and hereditary succession, not through self-assertion or political maneuvering. Princess Charlotte had demonstrated her understanding of this fundamental concept and her readiness to defend it when necessary. As the echoes of Princess Charlotte's words faded, the room seemed to settle into a new configuration. The hierarchy had been clearly established, the boundaries firmly drawn, and the proper relationship between all parties made explicit. Lady Victoria could continue to protest, but everyone present understood that the matter had been definitively settled by someone with the authority to make such decisions. The moment represented a perfect fusion of tradition and personal character. Princess Charlotte had drawn upon centuries of royal precedent while also demonstrating her own emerging qualities as a leader. The combination had produced a response that was both historically appropriate and personally authentic, showing that she was already growing into the role that awaited her. The silence that followed Princess Charlotte's declaration stretched for what felt like an eternity, though Thomas knew from his training that it lasted only seconds. In that brief pause, the entire dynamic of the room had shifted permanently. The 8-year-old princess remained standing with perfect composure, her words having created a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. Lady Victoria's face had gone through a remarkable series of transformations during those few seconds. The initial shock of hearing such definitive words from someone she had clearly underestimated gave way to a flush of embarrassment, then anger, and finally a kind of bewildered indignation as the full impact of what had happened began to sink in. She had come to Kensington Palace expecting to establish her authority over a child. Instead, she had received a lesson in royal hierarchy from that same child. Thomas observed the aftermath with professional fascination. He had witnessed many tense moments during his years of royal protection duty, but nothing quite like this. The combination of Princess Charlotte's youth and the absolute authority of her response created a unique situation that challenged everyone's expectations about power and leadership. The young princess had demonstrated that true authority had nothing to do with age and everything to do with legitimacy and character. Miss Andrews stepped forward slightly, her movement subtle but significant. The governess was prepared to support Princess Charlotte if needed, but her expression suggested that she recognized the young princess had handled the situation perfectly. Years of careful education and guidance had prepared Princess Charlotte for exactly this type of challenge, and she had responded with wisdom and authority that would have been impressive in someone 3 times her age. The palace staff continued their duties with practiced professionalism, but Thomas could see the subtle signs of their approval. The head butler's posture had straightened with obvious pride, and the footmen moved with a new energy that spoke to their satisfaction with how their young charge had handled the situation. These were individuals who had devoted their careers to serving the royal family, and they recognized excellence when they saw it. Lady Victoria made one last desperate attempt to salvage her position by appealing to what she termed family loyalty, and suggesting that Princess Charlotte was being influenced by advisors who didn't understand the importance of maintaining family connections. Her words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of both royal protocol and Princess Charlotte's character. The young princess had not been coached or manipulated. She had responded from her own understanding of her role and responsibilities. Princess Charlotte listened to these final protestations with the same patient attention she had shown throughout lunch, but her position remained absolutely unchanged. She had assessed the situation, made her decision, and delivered her response. No amount of additional argument would alter those facts. The 8-year-old had demonstrated one of the most important qualities of leadership: the ability to stand firm once the right decision had been made. The conversation that followed was stilted and uncomfortable, with Lady Victoria attempting to return to normal social discourse while everyone else processed what had just occurred. Her efforts to act as if nothing significant had happened only served to highlight the magnitude of her miscalculation. She had challenged royal authority and been decisively rebuffed, and no amount of casual conversation could undo that reality. Thomas noted how Princess Charlotte handled this awkward transition period with remarkable grace. She resumed her seat and participated in the remaining conversation with perfect courtesy, never allowing the tension of the confrontation to affect her behavior toward others. The young princess understood that having asserted her authority, she must now demonstrate that it came with responsibility and restraint. The lunch concluded with all the appropriate formalities, but the atmosphere remained charged with the memory of what had transpired. Lady Victoria's attempts to restore normalcy were unsuccessful, largely because she seemed unable to accept that the dynamic had permanently changed. She continued to make small comments that suggested she still believed her position entitled her to special consideration, each one serving to remind everyone present of her fundamental misunderstanding. As the meal ended, Princess Charlotte rose and formally thanked Lady Victoria for her visit, using the exact words and tone that protocol required for such occasions. The courtesy was perfect, the delivery flawless, but everyone understood that this was a dismissal, rather than an invitation for future interaction. The young princess had learned not just how to assert authority, but how to conclude difficult situations with dignity. Lady Victoria's departure from Kensington Palace was notably different from her arrival. Where she had swept in with confidence and barely concealed arrogance, she now left with obvious confusion and wounded pride. Her elaborate hat seemed less impressive, her commanding presence diminished by the encounter with someone who possessed genuine rather than assumed authority. Thomas accompanied the departure protocol from his position, watching as Lady Victoria was escorted to her waiting car with all the courtesy due to any guest. The palace staff performed their duties with perfect professionalism, but their demeanor reflected the satisfaction of having witnessed their young charge handle a difficult situation with exceptional skill and wisdom. In the days that followed, Thomas found himself reflecting frequently on what he had witnessed. The phrase, "You are a guest, I am the blood," had crystallized something essential about royal authority and the responsibilities that came with it. Princess Charlotte had not simply won an argument. She had demonstrated her understanding of principles that would guide her throughout her life. The story began to circulate within royal circles almost immediately, though always with appropriate discretion and respect for privacy. Senior palace staff who had not been present for the actual event sought details from those who had witnessed it, recognizing that something significant had occurred in the young princess's development. The consensus was universal. Princess Charlotte had demonstrated qualities that marked her as a natural leader. Miss Andrews incorporated the incident into Princess Charlotte's ongoing education, using it as an example of how theoretical knowledge about royal protocol translated into real-world situations. The governess emphasized that while Princess Charlotte's response had been perfect, the situation also demonstrated why such confrontations should be avoided when possible. Royal authority was most effective when it didn't need to be explicitly asserted. The broader implications of the incident extended beyond the immediate confrontation. Princess Charlotte had shown that she understood the weight of her position and was prepared to defend it when necessary. This knowledge would influence how others approached her in the future, creating a foundation of respect that would serve her well as she grew into her royal role. Thomas discussed the incident with his colleague in the Royal Protection Unit, though always within the bounds of professional discretion. The consensus among the security staff was that Princess Charlotte had demonstrated leadership qualities that would make their job easier in the long run. A royal who understood her own authority and could assert it when necessary was someone who could be trusted to make good decisions in challenging situations. The incident also had educational value for the palace staff who witnessed it. Many of them were relatively new to royal service and had been uncertain about how to balance respect for guests against loyalty to the royal family. Princess Charlotte's handling of the situation provided a clear example of how such conflicts should be resolved, with courtesy toward all parties but absolute clarity about the hierarchy that governed royal life. Lady Victoria's behavior had revealed something important about the challenges that Princess Charlotte would face throughout her life. There would always be people who sought to exploit their connection to the royal family for personal advantage, who confused proximity with authority, and who believed that royal courtesy was a sign of weakness rather than strength. The young princess had learned to recognize and address such behavior early in her development. The phrase, "I am the blood," took on particular significance in royal historical context. It echoed similar declarations by monarchs throughout British history who had been forced to assert their authority against various challenges. Princess Charlotte had shown that she understood not just her current position, but the historical precedent that supported it. The incident became a reference point for future interactions between Princess Charlotte and various members of the extended royal family and aristocracy. Word of how she had handled Lady Victoria's presumptuous behavior spread through appropriate channels, creating an understanding that the young princess was not to be underestimated or manipulated. This reputation would prove valuable as she continued to grow and develop. Thomas realized that he had witnessed a moment that would be studied by future historians and biographers as evidence of Princess Charlotte's emerging character and leadership ability. The combination of youth and authority, courtesy and firmness, had created a perfect example of how royal power should be exercised, reluctantly when necessary, but decisively when required. The memory of Princess Charlotte's quiet declaration would remain with everyone who witnessed it, serving as a reminder that true authority came from within rather than from external validation. The 8-year-old had taught everyone present a lesson about leadership, dignity, and the proper use of power that would influence their understanding of royal life for years to come. Months had passed since the confrontation in the blue drawing room, but Thomas Whitmore found himself thinking about it regularly as he continued his duties protecting Princess Charlotte. The incident had marked a turning point not just in how others viewed the young princess, but in how she viewed herself and her responsibilities. The 8-year-old who had stood her ground against Lady Victoria's presumptions had grown into someone even more assured and thoughtful about her role. The immediate aftermath of the lunch had seen a subtle but noticeable shift in how palace staff, visitors, and even senior royals interacted with Princess Charlotte. Word of her decisive handling of Lady Victoria had spread through appropriate channels, creating an understanding that despite her youth, she possessed both the authority and the will to use it when circumstances required. This reputation had proven valuable in numerous subsequent situations. Thomas had observed Princess Charlotte carefully in the weeks following the incident, watching for any signs that the confrontation might have affected her negatively. Instead, he witnessed a young person who seemed more confident in her own judgment and more comfortable with the responsibilities of her position. The experience had taught her that she could trust her instincts and stand firm when necessary, lessons that would serve her well throughout her life. Miss Andrews had incorporated the incident into Princess Charlotte's ongoing education in subtle but important ways. The governess used the confrontation as a case study in leadership, protocol, and the proper exercise of royal authority. These discussions helped Princess Charlotte understand not just what she had done right, but why her response had been so effective and how the principles involved could guide future decisions. The broader royal household had taken note of Princess Charlotte's emerging leadership qualities. Senior staff members who had initially been protective of the young princess began to seek her input on matters that affected her daily life, recognizing that she had demonstrated wisdom beyond her years. This gradual increase in responsibility helped prepare her for the greater challenges that would come as she grew older. Lady Victoria herself had never returned to Kensington Palace. though Thomas had heard through palace networks that she continued to speak about her relationship with the royal family in social circles. Her version of events apparently differed significantly from what had actually occurred, but those who mattered understood the truth of the situation. The incident had effectively ended any possibility that she might gain the access to royal life that she had sought. The phrase, "You are a guest, I am the blood," had taken on legendary status within royal circles, though it was always discussed with appropriate discretion. Palace staff would occasionally reference it when dealing with visitors who seemed to misunderstand the proper hierarchy or protocol. The 7 words had become a perfect encapsulation of how royal authority should be exercised, with clarity, dignity, and absolute finality. Thomas had been present for many subsequent interactions where Princess Charlotte's reputation for quiet authority had influenced outcomes without any need for confrontation. Visitors who might once have tried to overstep boundaries now approached their interactions with appropriate respect and deference. The young princess had earned something that couldn't be taught or inherited: genuine respect based on demonstrated character. The incident had also served as valuable training for Thomas and his colleagues in the Royal Protection Unit. They had learned to recognize the subtle signs that preceded challenges to royal authority, and to position themselves to support their charges without interfering in the complex social dynamics of royal life. Princess Charlotte's handling of Lady Victoria had shown them that sometimes the best protection was knowing when not to intervene. As Princess Charlotte continued to grow and develop, the lessons of that November afternoon remained visible in how she approached new challenges and opportunities. She had learned to trust her own judgment while remaining open to advice from those she respected. The balance was delicate but crucial for someone in her position, and the confrontation with Lady Victoria had provided an early opportunity to practice these skills. The impact extended beyond Princess Charlotte herself to influence how other young royals were educated and prepared for their roles. Miss Andrews shared her experiences with colleagues who worked with other royal children, emphasizing the importance of helping them understand not just their privileges, but their responsibilities. The incident had demonstrated that even very young royals could exercise authority effectively when they understood the principles involved. Thomas had witnessed several occasions where Princess Charlotte referenced the incident indirectly when explaining her decisions or approaches to challenging situations. She never spoke about it directly, but the confidence she had gained from successfully handling such a difficult confrontation was evident in how she approached subsequent challenges. The experience had become a foundation of self-assurance that would serve her throughout her life. The story had also entered palace folklore in a way that honored both Princess Charlotte's wisdom and the importance of maintaining proper protocol. New staff members learned about it during their orientation, not as gossip but as an example of how royal hierarchy worked in practice. The incident demonstrated that respect for the crown was not simply a matter of tradition, but a living principle that continued to govern royal life. Years later, when Thomas reflected on his career in royal protection, the confrontation in the Blue Drawing Room remained one of his most memorable experiences. He had witnessed many important moments in royal life, but few had illustrated so clearly the difference between inherited position and earned authority. Princess Charlotte had shown that true leadership came from understanding one's role and having the courage to fulfill it. The incident had also highlighted the importance of the support system that surrounded young royals as they developed their understanding of their roles. Miss Andrews, the palace staff, and even protection officers like Thomas all played crucial parts in creating an environment where Princess Charlotte could learn and grow into her responsibilities. The confrontation with Lady Victoria had been a test of not just the princess's character, but of the entire system designed to prepare her for leadership. As Princess Charlotte entered her teenage years, the lessons of that defining moment continued to influence her development. She had learned that authority came with responsibility, that power should be exercised reluctantly but decisively when necessary, and that maintaining dignity was possible even in the most challenging circumstances. These principles would guide her throughout her life and eventual reign. Thomas eventually moved on to other assignments within the Royal Protection Unit, but he maintained a special interest in Princess Charlotte's continued development. The young girl who had stood firm against Lady Victoria's presumptions grew into a teenager known for her thoughtfulness, integrity, and natural leadership ability. The seeds planted during that confrontation had grown into qualities that would serve the nation well. The Blue Drawing Room itself seemed to carry the memory of that afternoon. Thomas noticed that subsequent meals held there had a different quality, as if the space itself remembered the moment when a young princess had asserted her rightful authority with such quiet power. The room had witnessed history in the making, a moment when character and position had combined to create something truly memorable. In the broader context of royal history, the incident would eventually be recognized as a crucial moment in Princess Charlotte's development. Biographers would note it as evidence of her early understanding of royal responsibility and her natural leadership ability. The phrase, "You are a guest, I am the blood," would be quoted as an example of how royal authority could be exercised with both strength and grace. The legacy of that November afternoon extended far beyond the immediate participants. It had demonstrated principles of leadership, respect, and authority that would influence palace protocol and royal education for generations. Princess Charlotte had not simply won a confrontation, she had provided an example of how power should be exercised in a modern monarchy. Thomas often wondered what had become of Lady Victoria, though he never sought information about her subsequent life. Her attempt to establish authority over a member of the royal family had failed completely, and the manner of that failure had ensured that similar attempts would be unlikely in the future. The incident had served as both a victory for proper protocol and a warning to others who might harbor similar ambitions. The final measure of the incident's importance lay in how it had shaped Princess Charlotte's understanding of her role and responsibilities. The confrontation had occurred at a crucial time in her development, providing her with confidence and wisdom that would influence every aspect of her future service to the crown and nation. The 8-year-old who had spoken those 7 decisive words had begun the transformation into the leader she was destined to become. As Thomas looked back on that defining moment, he felt privileged to have witnessed something that would be remembered and studied for generations. The quiet authority of a young princess, the perfect choice of words, and the absolute clarity of purpose had combined to create a moment of pure leadership that honored both tradition and character. Princess Charlotte had shown that day what it truly meant to be royal, and that lesson would guide her for the rest of her life.